Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those who aren't able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. This is our first meeting in person of the Scrutiny Commission for more than a year. However, due to the continued restrictions, we're limited with the number of people we can have in the room, and therefore some officers who are presenting reports will be joining the meeting virtually. As we have a number of new members now appointed to the Commission, I'm going to first ask members to introduce themselves, just names and the areas that they represent on the county. I've received apologies from Mr. Barclay and with Mr. Fillimore acting as his substitute. So if we start with Les at the back, if you want to introduce yourself. And then
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Les Fillimore, representing the Countess Orphan Cosby Division. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rosita Page, and I am representing the Lutterworth Division.
Good morning. My name is Hilary Fryer, and I represent Quorn and Barrow.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jonathan Morgan. I represent Loughborough South West, and I'm also chair of the Health Scrutiny Committee here at County.
Good morning, everyone. James Poland, representing Syston Foss, and I'm one of the Scrutiny Commissioners.
Good morning, Terry Richardson, representing Narborough and Whetstone.
Good morning, Max Hunt, representing Loughborough Northwest.
Morning, Trevor Pendleton, representing Castle Donington and Kegworth.
Morning, Simon Galton, representing Laund in East Leicestershire.
Thank you, everybody. The first item is the appointment of chairman. Members are asked to note that I've been appointed chairman of the Scrutiny Commission in accordance with Article 6.05 of the County Council's Constitution. I would like to take this opportunity as the new chair to thank my predecessor, Simon Galton, who it's good to see is still on the commission, for his past work in chairing this scrutiny body. Simon became chairman of the commission in 2009. He took over at the point when the findings of an external review conducted by Steve Nicklin of the Local Government Leadership Centre and Jessica Crowe of the Centre for Public Scrutiny had reported its findings and was instrumental in developing the action plan to respond to the review. This including the development of guides and protocols for conducting scrutiny, which still operates today. His inclusive and apolitical approach has ensured that scrutiny has been held in high regard, both internally and in external assessments, and I would hope to carry on his work in that regard. As members will be aware, Mr. Hunt has been appointed the new Labour group leader following the recent elections, taking over the role that was previously held by Dr. Einan, and I would like to record our thanks to Dr. Einan for her time as a Scrutiny Commissioner, and also thanks to Mr. Bedford for his time as a Scrutiny Commissioner, and he's now a member of the Cabinet. So moving on to agenda item 2, which is the election of vice chairman. Can I ask for nominations for the vice chair, please?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Rosita Page.
Mr. Poland.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to second that nomination, please, to Mrs. Page.
Right, so it's now moved and seconded. Are we all in agreement? Congratulations, Mrs. Page. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations to you. And hopefully we can follow onto the inclusive, apolitical approach Simon Galton led with this Scrutiny Commission. And I would also like to join you at this moment to thank Simon, because it was absolutely brilliant working with him over these years. And thank you to Terry and Peter. Thank you.
So item 3 is the minutes from the last meeting. As I wasn't a member of the Commission at the time, can I please ask someone who was present to propose the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2021 are taken as read, confirmed and signed?
Happy to.
Yeah. Is everyone agreed? Yeah. Okay. So agenda item 4 is question time. We have received a set of questions from Mrs. Scott. Copies of the questions and the replies given to her have been circulated to all members and have been published online as well, so these can be taken as read. Mrs. Scott has advised me that she doesn't have any supplementary questions and so has chosen not to attend the meeting today. That therefore concludes this item, but I'd like to thank Mrs. Scott for taking the time to engage with the committee and for her questions. So on to item 5 and questions asked by elected members. I've received 3 questions from Mr. Hunt, answers to which have been circulated and published online and so will be taken as read. Mr. Hunt, do you have any supplementary questions?
I do, Chair. Very briefly, question 3, which concerns the 300 redundancies at Brush Traction. And for those members who aren't familiar with Brush Traction, an engineering company, it's not an old-fashioned company. It's a company that would have bid for the investigation into the Hitachi electric trains, but unfortunately couldn't do due to the closure of the plant. In the answer, the statement says that there have been discussions with Charnwood and an update from the DTI or the IT and further discussions planned. And I wondered if there was any outcome from the discussions with Charnwood, what update was received from the DIT, and whether I could have a further report on the discussions from the Economic Recovery Cell. Without that information, I think the answer, frankly, is a little bit bland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Officers, are you able to respond?
Chairman, may I ask a question? As we are the Scrutiny Commission, could officers advise whether it is relevant that these questions, because they're not relating to the agenda, appropriate to the Commission? Could, just general for next time as well.
The questions are relevant to the Scrutiny Commission. The questions are relevant to this particular committee on the basis that they relate to economic development and the work of the LEP. And I think we've got Tom Pennell online who can probably try and provide a response to the supplementary.
So just to recap through you, Chairman, question to the Commission have got to be at all times relevant to items on the agenda.
Questions raised under this particular standing order, as long as they fall within the remit of this committee, will be appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Purnell, did you want to come back? Terry, do you want to?
If I just raise a point of order on that. I mean, I can understand our Economic Recovery Cell looking at this, but I don't think it is the duty of this council to talk on behalf of another council. So it is not up to us, I would suggest, to go to Charnwood and comment on their discussions with anyone. That's entirely up to Charnwood Borough Council. I would suggest an outside the remit of the county council. I understand on the economic recovery side, fine, but for a question to say what would have the result of the discussions with Charnwood, that is up to Charnwood what the result of those discussions were.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Can I refer to Tom now for a response to Mr. Hunt? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I just give a little bit of background on hearing about the situation at Brush, officers made contact with both Charnwood Borough Council and the LEP, just really to check the steps being taken to provide support to the company and affected employees, and to see whether there was any support that the council could provide. In those discussions, we were made aware that ministers, and that's part of Mr. Hunt's question, that ministers were fully aware of the developments of Brush, and we were assured that the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and also the Department of Work and Pensions were providing the support that you would expect in this sort of situation. I know that the LEP's Economic Recovery Cell, or the Economic Recovery Cell that's been led by the LEP, is overseeing this activity, and there is a meeting of that group coming up, I think, in the next week or so. What I can undertake to do is to provide a written update to Mr. Hunt following that meeting of the current state of play, if that's satisfactory to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. That would be great if you could provide that. Yes, thank you. So now item 6, I've not been notified of any urgent items for item 6. So that brings on to item 7, where we have any declarations of interest. So do any members have any declarations of interest that they wish to declare?
Chairman, as we are going into a new administration cycle, can we make sure that the interests of all district councillors and all us dual-hatted members are noted as standard for any future items? So, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. So we'll routinely list district and borough membership as an interest. Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. It's unlikely to become a discussion point, but I always declare a personal interest in early years and SEND, as my wife is employed in that arena. It is referenced in the draft overview and scrutiny annual report, so it's just for the record of personal interest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Phillimore. Any more declarations of interest from any other members? No? Okay. So item 8 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No? Okay. Item 9 is petitions. We've not received any petitions. So therefore, item 10, we're moving on to the first substantial item, which is the annual report on the commercial strategy. This is set out in pages 13 to 32 of your agenda packs. We've got Chris Tambini here, the Director of Corporate Resources, who will introduce this item. We also have Jane Glasgow, the Assistant Director, and Nev Wilkinson, the Head of Commercial Services, who are joining us online. Can I just check that Jane and Nev are with us and can hear us okay? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we're here. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And we've also got the new lead member for resources, Mr. Brecken, with us on the call today as well. Welcome, Mr. Brecken.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
So, Chris, would you like to go ahead and present the item?
I'm just going to say a couple of words, and I'm going to pass over to Jane and Nev to take you through the actual report. Just by way of introduction, Jane Glasgow is the Assistant Director who's responsible for commercial services. We had a reorganisation in corporate resources last year and reduced the number of assistant directors. So it's a relatively new portfolio, part of her portfolio. So she's kind of getting to grips with it. She'll take you through last year, but I think it goes without saying that it was a very, very tough year. And I think this year is probably not going to be as tough as last year, but there are going to be some kind of difficulties and issues as we work our way through recovering from the pandemic. And that's all I was going to say. So really over to you, Jane, you can take us through the detail.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, my name is Jane Glasgow. I'm one of the assistant directors within corporate resources and responsible for LTS. The last year has genuinely been unprecedented, and I know that's a term that's used a lot, but it has been an incredibly challenging year. However, I do think that what we have seen over the last year has been quite an impressive response from the Leicestershire Traded Services team in terms of not only mitigating and managing the impacts of the pandemic. I mean, a number of our services have been essentially shut for large portions of the year. Other services have had to change and rapidly respond based on various restriction periods, lockdowns, etc. And despite all of that, we have ended up in a position where taking advantage of things like sales fees and charges, prudent use of furlough, mitigating costs, and in some areas restructuring parts of the business, we have ended up in a position where, whilst we have not hit obviously the target that was set the year before, we have ended up in almost a cost neutral position. There's some really positive news in all of this as well, and I think that positive news is that because we have been running the school food service, we have worked really hard to ensure that the children of Leicestershire and some other authorities obviously have been fed, that we've kept meals being provided for vulnerable children and key workers' children that have been attending school even when school was shut for the majority. which was, as you can imagine, quite a logistical challenge in terms of ensuring that we kept staff safe, children safe, teachers safe, and so forth, as well as coordinating and providing school food vouchers for the county children, and in some cases, food parcel as well. The team has been able to react really quickly, and there has been a number of rapid changes in terms of school closures, openings, and we've been able to respond exceptionally quickly in a matter of days in each of those cases to ensure that that happens. On top of that, we've provided other services to schools to ensure they can stay open in terms of IT support, facility support, and those types of things as well. So we've made a real difference to ensuring that our schools stay open and being able to provide a safe environment for those children and for those teachers. On top of that, where we have furloughed staff, some of those staff have been involved in supporting local hospitals, testing. They were out in Melton Mowbray last year doing work to support the avian flu outbreak. So we've done a lot of work above and beyond the traded services remit with those people who were available to provide those services since we had other services shut. Going into next year or into this financial year, again, it will be a recovery year. Early signs indicate that areas such as school foods, for example, are already starting to do very well, although we're only two periods into the financial year. We do still have some challenges because we are still under restrictions. So when you look at some of our hospitality, for example, they're not fully open, although they are partially open in some cases. So there will be a period that we go through over the coming months as we come out of these restrictions and come back to full service. Again, we will continue to manage our costs, optimize our operating model, and mitigate and manage our position based on what's happening at the time and reacting quickly as we have done previously. So I'm going to hand over to Nev Wilkinson, the head of the service, and he can take you through the detail of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, members. I think Jane and Chris have covered the key issues. I'll just add some other points. As well as the free school meal vouchers, we actually took on the COVID winter grant scheme, and there was a successful 47,000 grants made to vulnerable people over the winter and spring period, which I think was a big support to people in need in Leicestershire. There was mention of Lemis and HR. School music also adapted. It had its first virtual concert in the summer instead of going to De Montfort Hall for the first time in probably its 70-year history. So that was, again, a real effort from the staff to develop and do things in a new way and make sure that children weren't suffering anymore in terms of the loss of music and are able to still perform, albeit in a very different way. Property, lots of new opportunities in terms of cleaning and adaptations, and Country Park saw a huge upturn, which is, after the first lockdown was one of the only things open that people were going to, and that presented different challenges to us in terms of making sure there was safe social distancing and that people were staying safe. One of the other things was that the Century Theatre, which is still closed, but we took advantage of a government-funded grant scheme, cultural recovery scheme, to secure £250,000 to upgrade some of the facilities while it was shut, and that work will be completed in the coming weeks. So we tried as much as we could to turn what was very difficult into something positive. One area that was dramatically affected, as you all know, was the food court. Overnight, really, its footfall, its business just disappeared, and we've had to make quite significant changes to that area. Looking forward, as Jane said, we've used this period of time to reshape our businesses, to make them more, to reduce the fixed cost base and to make them more financially resilient. So we're now operating new operating models in all the cafes, and actually taking advantage of things that have been difficult to do in the past, but we've now launched in partnership with Heritage a food offer for the educational visits to Bosworth, which will help Tithe Barn and Tithe Barn's performance. We've got new menus, new offers, and we also, as of yesterday, securing an alcohol license at Beacon so that we can do some evening type pizza and prosecco type events, and maybe link that with the music service as well in a very limited way, so that we obviously don't affect the country park. Bow Manor Hall received its first children last week, so not on residential yet, but certainly back on day visits, and the bookings are very strong there for both residential visits and weddings this year and next year, as soon as that's allowed. And as Jane said, school food, we've launched new contracts there. So I think between the two of us, we've probably covered the salient points, and happy to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, Jane and Nev. Mr. Brecken, did you want to add anything to this item before I move to members' comments and questions?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with what's been presented, and obviously welcome members to ask questions, and obviously I think the right people in the room to answer those questions. Thank you.
So any members wish to make questions, comments on the report? Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's 2 years since we've had this report. That's not a criticism, we just have been in the pandemic. I wouldn't have expected to see it. And therefore, I think my first observation, it would have been useful if we'd had figures for 2019 end of year within the report, as a comparison to how we set the budget and where we were against it. So it would have been interesting to see performance. I suppose my main question is around the information available. So I think a couple of years ago, I did ask at this meeting if we could have a breakdown by location. So, you know, the cafe at Bosworth, etc. And certainly it would be interesting to see separate figures for each of the locations. And the reason I say that is on page 24, I think it is, at the bottom, it talks about Beacon Hill doing exceptionally well, which is great news, but it's been so successful we might need to put additional investment and equipment in it. So it would be interesting to know what the business plan originally said for that, because I would have thought if we've exceeded expectations during the pandemic, there may have been a flaw in the business plan in the expectations for it. Also, it's not clear from the figures whether things like the MRP costs of these locations are included within these net figures. So I don't know, perhaps Chris will be able to advise us if these are the gross income before we take off additional costs, or as if this is the net income after all costs. But I just would urge if we could have a breakdown by locations. I think as long as I've been a member here, we've talked about the difficulties at the Tithe Barn at Bosworth. But again, without any statistics showing the performance, it's difficult to know whether we're, to use the awful expression, flogging a dead horse, or whether or not there is something we can do to turn it around. And I suppose just as a general aside, which I hadn't picked up before, but it was something that Nev mentioned in his comments about the great value our country parks provide to the residents of Leicestershire, which I think is undoubted. Could I perhaps urge that during the lockdowns where we were unable to travel, I think it illustrated the disparity of locations of country parks across Leicestershire, which are predominantly in the northwest corner. And I would just urge the council to look at its land holdings to see if we could have a more equitable split of country parks across the whole of Leicestershire for its residents.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Chris, did you want to come back?
If I pick up some of those, and then Nev, if you want to pick up the Beacon Hill question, that's okay. Just in terms of the management information, I do recall those comments. We are looking at the MI actually in terms of both operational and in terms of what we will be providing to members. So I think kind of during this year and definitely next year we will be providing far more of a breakdown in terms of geographic location, etc. So we can definitely do that. But it's also something we're looking at in terms of, I suppose, the operational kind of efficiency in terms of the information we can provide to the managers as well. So we're looking at all different levels. So I can give that assurance. Oh, is it not picked? All right, yeah. No, so we will be able to pick that up and provide more detail on that definitely next year. So that won't be an issue. Just on the country parks and location, I mean, all I can do is agree. I mean, they are kind of northwest going across the band of the middle of Leicestershire, and there aren't that many in terms of down south or up north, which is a bit of a kind of historical kind of circumstance. But It is something that has been mentioned to me a number of times, but clearly it is quite a big kind of undertaking to open a new country park. But it is something that has been kind of noticed, and I suppose that any opportunity does come up, we will look at it seriously. And I'll pass on to Nev if you want to pick up the detailed question around kind of Beacon Hill and the performance there.
Yes, thanks, Chris. So obviously the business plan was done some years ago, and it was based on information that we had at the time around footfall, around car parking, and all of the things that you would normally expect to put in. The last year, whilst some of the time it was closed, a lot of the time it was much busier than we ever anticipated, and busier. It only actually opened in July 19, so busier than it was in the tail end of the previous summer. And also, I think people are more inclined to have takeaway type food than sit in, and originally it was more of a come in and sit down. So I think the reference in the report to further investment is actually to review the cooking facilities we've got in order to review the offer, so we better match what we anticipate is going to be the future customer demand as we go forward. It's very difficult to be very sure of that, so we do want to wait a little while. But I was there last week, and there was nobody sitting inside. Everybody was getting a takeaway, taking that out, sitting in the park. Okay, the weather was good, but that footfall is much greater. So I think with any business plan, you make a set of assumptions at the time. Things change. We have to review that. We have to go forward, and we'll bring a business case back in terms of any investment that's required.
Thank you, Chris and Nev. Did you wish to come back, Mr. Richardson? Yeah.
Yes, if I thank the officers for that information. Just a couple of questions unanswered. Obviously, do these figures include all the costs? And I did specifically mention MRP costs for the investment. And secondly, could I please request that it strikes me as too long to wait until next year for the information. It's 2 years now. So could we perhaps have a written response, perhaps within the next month or so that would give that information for us to look at? I'd be very grateful if that was possible.
Yeah, we can provide some more detailed information. And in terms of MRP and the kind of capital financing costs, I'm pretty certain they don't include those costs, but Nev can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, these are trading figures. They're not the way that the accounting was done. They're not included in these figures. I mean, as you said, Chris, we're looking at the way that we're looking at profit and loss and the way we're accounting, so we can again pick that up in the review over the next year.
Just a final time, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I mean, that's my point, really. We have no idea whether these areas are profitable if they don't show all the costs. And therefore, until we get that information, we don't know as a scrutiny committee what we're scrutinising in terms of profitability or otherwise of these locations. They could all be making a loss, and we don't know. I suspect they're not, because I think our officers are too good for that, but it would just be nice to have that confirmatory information.
I mean, as Nev said and Carla said in the answer to the first question, we are looking at the management information that we provide internally. We will be looking at it in terms of how it picks up all the various kind of capital costs. Clearly, for some services such as school food, the capital costs aren't that significant in any event. But for others such as Bow Manor, it's probably got a bigger impact in terms of the overall profitability. But for most of them, actually, the capital costs are relatively small impact.
Right, so I've got Mr. Morgan, Mr. Galton, and Mr. Poland. Anybody else wanting to contribute? So if I go to Mr. Morgan next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I really just sort of following on from Mr. Richardson's comments, particularly about our traded services. Obviously, there are a couple of comments in the appendix about, particularly on page 20, about the service and the competition from MATs in particular, and the fact that many of the schools in the county are looking to tender against the service that we have previously been offering. And it sort of raises questions, particularly in relation to the service that we seem to have taken on in Luton, which is clearly well and truly outside of our area. It talks about revenue, but the point on all of this, I think, following on from Mr. Richardson's point, revenue is almost irrelevant, because actually it should be about profit on the basis. I'm assuming the only reason we would actually have taken on a service in Luton would be to add to the financial health of our county, not necessarily for the generous support of students in Luton. And it sort of comes back to the principal point, which is actually about traded services and how profitable are they? Because if we are finding increasing competition from MATs in particular, and the fact that they are actually going to other sources and other companies to actually provide things like school lunches and support for schools that are academies, at what point do our traded services, at what point do they actually cease to become a relevant part of the business plan going forward? And I'm sort of thinking particularly about other sectors in other councils historically that have faced competition, building control, for instance, being a very good one. When that was opened up to the private sector, it pretty well sort of took over the services that had previously been provided by local authorities. And I do wonder whether school meals in particular are one of those areas that maybe over time will end up being more profitable, therefore more likely to be provided by the private sector rather than actually us as a local authority. So in particular, in relation to the Luton contract, turnover, I always think you can buy turnover. From my business life, buying turnover is the easy thing. Being profitable is actually a lot harder, and we don't talk about the profit in these contracts. We only talk about turnover, which makes me very nervous.
If I pick this up, but Nev and Jane, is anything I miss, feel free to add at the end. But bizarrely, I was looking at the figures for Luton contract this morning. And I must admit, when we went into that contract, because it was really in the middle of the pandemic, we were quite nervous about it. And we did actually think about whether we should not go into it. But we took the decision to go into it because we had certain things that we could actually withdraw if it wasn't actually working out. But so far, we are actually making a profit, and we do look at the contribution. So it's not just about the revenue, it is about the profit. And I think from memory, we target, is it an 8% return, Nev? I think that's the minimum return we'll look at. So we are making a profit on it so far. And I don't think that's going to change. Actually, the projection for the year looks fairly healthy, so that does look okay. You are right in terms of the competition. There is a lot of competition around school food, although it is one of those kind of low margin defensive kind of areas. And if you look back at over recent years, we have made a decent return on it. I think going back 2 or 3 years, we were making in the order of £1 million. It has been kind of reduced because of some of the pressures, particularly around the living wage, has been a real kind of impact, and that pressure is clearly going to be with us for a little while. But we're in it to provide a good service, but we are in it also to provide a decent return for the county council. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Jane or Neb?
Yes, please, if I may. So one of the things we've also done is, as Chris suggested, going into new business during the pandemic did mean that we took a lot more time to look more carefully at the contract as we were going through it. We have taken the opportunity to review our commercial contract position and have beefed up our contracts as a result to ensure that we have more protections in place. Additionally, we've added additional review steps with from both a finance, a commercial, and a senior leadership position as we go into new contracts with some really good modeling, and we do multiple variant modeling and those types of things. And I would say additionally to that, Luton is a prime example. We're under this new regime. We're actually tracking Luton separately in great detail to ensure that it is performing and meeting its expectations as we take on the new service. So we're being very, very careful in terms of the governance that sits around these types of deals. Neb, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, if I may. I think the papers refer to previous Cabinet reports and Scrutiny Commission reports, where it was a clear strategy for growth and growth not just within the county, but also looking externally. As Chris said, we are in school food particularly, but in other areas, every business suffers increased costs every year in terms of inflation and pay rises. And if we were to just stay within Leicestershire, then the outcome of diminishing returns and loss of business would mean that the business would become unviable quite quickly. By going to targeted areas where we know we're going to make a margin, we've got a very good school food business. We're one of the only two in the country that's got gold accreditation. And that means when we take over, there's always quite a big upside in terms of improvements in efficiencies, improvements in qualities. Improvement in quality means increased sales. So we get a good return, even based on the modelling that we put together as the as-is position. So the success stories have been in the city. I think we've got about 25, 30 schools in the city now that we've taken over the last couple of years. And those inner city urban schools, which have got high pupil numbers, are the ones that are the most advantageous for us to take over to bring a greater return. We wouldn't necessarily pursue business in other rural areas in Lincolnshire, for example, with low numbers, high overheads, high costs of transport, etc. So we're very careful about what we do and how we do it. And obviously it isn't just school food. Lemis has just won some work in Birmingham, a MAT in Birmingham, and most of that is remotely delivered. So the costs of delivery are no different to what we've got now, and there's much more of the income going straight to the bottom line.
Thank you, Chris. Jane, and now Mr. Morgan.
So thank you very much for the response. I think in that case, it's probably the report doesn't necessarily highlight the sort of good responses that you've just given. It talks about turnover. It doesn't actually talk about the returns or some of the points that you've actually raised. So I mean, my only plea would be that the reports actually reflect some of the commentary that you've just given, because it probably helps to explain the very good reasons why we're looking to expand outside of the county, and the benefits for not only the schools that we're supplying outside of county, but also the benefits for the county itself and its balance sheet. So it would just be a plea really for more than just turnover in the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Chris.
Yeah, I fully accept that. The only thing I would say, there is a little bit of a balance between kind of giving away too much commercially confidential information, but I do accept that we could include more in them.
Thank you, Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your comments and those of Rosita at the beginning of the meeting. I did 10 years in that position, and I always think it's time not to sit there until you drop off your perch, to hand over to someone else to have a go. But I'm still here and still going to be here. Not contrary to rumours, I'm not disappearing. So this report in front of us, I mean, historically, traded services as it is today came out of a scrutiny report, a panel that looked at traded services, as did school food many years ago. School food was provided outside of the council until a scrutiny panel looked at it. And I have to say that the standard, we went and had some meals. I can remember going and have some meals. They were appalling. The quality was appalling. The children didn't like it. And I think if you look now, leaving aside the pandemic, if you look now at the reports that come back, satisfaction, that was the word I was looking at, it's generally quite high, and the quality of the meals is much better. So for our own children, our own county, I don't think we should lose sight of that. But the real issue on traded services is that, again, leaving aside the pandemic, it's made a significant contribution to our budget in the tune of millions of pounds, which otherwise, if that money hadn't come in, that would mean more cuts, would it not? That would mean we would have to make more cuts to services, because that income from traded services wouldn't be able to help balance the budget. And I think that's another reason why members previously felt it's very important to build this as much as we can. My question really was about the pandemic. So what support? I mean, I know we lose track of all these bits of money the government has been given out. for COVID, and some of it's ring fenced, some of it's not. But my understanding from previous discussions is that some of the money it has been possible to use it to offset the costs that are ongoing, even when we're not able to provide the services. I think it would be helpful, perhaps, when we have the next financial report, could we please have an update of exactly where we are on money received from the government, say over the last 6 months. I don't think we go right back to the beginning, because we have had reports, but I think I've lost track of recent announcements that come out of the government, little bits of money. You're not even sure whether it's going to us or whether it's going somewhere else or to the districts and so on and so forth. So it would be helpful, but specifically on this report, how much money have we received from the government to help offset the costs that have continued, even though we haven't been able to provide the service? Thank you.
Again, I'm gonna maybe Nev's got the answer to the question, but if he hasn't got the exact figure, we can provide it. But we have had some significant contributions in terms of the furlough scheme, which has been very helpful, and also the government introduced a kind of fees and charges scheme for all local authorities where they did trade, and there was a massive reduction in their traded services. So that would have helped authorities, for example, with I know big parking operations, but it has helped us in terms of our traded services. I'm not sure if you've got the figure to hand, Nev.
Sorry, I was just looking. No, I haven't got the exact figure. It was to the tune of several £1 million in both furlough and sales fees and charges income that we were able to receive, and also the cultural recovery grant that I mentioned for Century Theatre, which was 250,000. But we can get the figures, the detailed figures.
Right, Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for the report. It was an interesting read. Still on the traded services, if that's okay. I must say I didn't appreciate that we supplied school meals to schools in Luton until I read the report. My question is therefore really about the scope of traded services in school meals and any other relevant areas. To what extent is our scope geographic? So do we go anywhere nationally? Obviously Luton's well outside the scope, has been said, but do we look literally anywhere in the country? And when we do that in the same way that, say, a commercial organisation would? So that in that sense we are comparable with the private sector when we're supplying them to Luton or Newcastle or wherever they choose to do that. And there's an aside question from that. Do we have limits on where we go geographically? And also, do we have, for want of a better description, an advertising budget or anything where we sort of promote our services beyond borders of our county? And I do have a follow-up question, and a different question, if that's okay.
I'm going to pass this one to Jane and Nev, but just to reassure members that we do a lot of kind of due diligence work before we do a bid, and we would only ever bid if we thought there was a reasonable margin and the risks were low. So, but I'll pass on to Nev and Jane, and they can kind of flesh out that answer.
Yes, I mean we have. So, as Mr. Galton said, we've been pursuing a growth strategy for a number of years, and our focus had been the city for several years, and we've done very well in there. We also do have customers just on our borders. So we've talked about MATs before. MATs don't respect county borders. They go across borders. So we've got a number of schools just on the edge which are part of a MAT contract. So we've got some in Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Lincolnshire, Rutland. So in answer to your question, we wouldn't go anywhere, but we wouldn't necessarily not look anywhere. So if there were single schools, single sites for school food, we wouldn't be interested. If they were single sites for an online service like LEMIS or HR, something like that, then maybe we would, because there's no additional cost of delivery because it's all online. Where we would look at a new geographic location would be the sort of characteristics that I described before. So we've got a cluster of schools. There are enough schools in that cluster for us to manage them together, so we're keeping our management costs down. they've got the right characteristics in terms of the numbers of pupils, the number of free school meal take up, etc., which makes it easily achieve our 8% target of margin before we go in for any bid. So we tend to be focusing around the urban areas around the Midlands would be our general focus. And actually, from the bottom of the county, Luton, although it seems far, it isn't that great distance down the M1, as long as the traffic's okay. So it's that general Midlands urban areas are the ones that we're focusing on.
Okay, Mr. Poland, you have another question.
Thank you again, and thank you very much for the answers. This is separate to that, if that's okay. In one of the answers to one of the first questions, forgive me, it was talked about the, I think it was to Mr. Richardson's question, talked about how the type of food people are buying from the shops is more takeaway than eat-in. And that just made me wonder, to what extent has that sort of led to an increase in rubbish and litter at the sites? And if we have seen an uptake, an increase in that, does that lead to any increase in costs associated with that? And as a linked, is it also that have we thought about sort of the packaging we use to make that more environmentally friendly? Thank
you. Sorry.
I was going to pass to Jane for this one. I mean, Jane's also picks up country parks as well, and that there has been an increase in littering in country parks. It seems to have calmed down, or it's not crossed my desk for a few months. I mean, last summer was a particular problem, but I'll pass over to Jane.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. There was an increase in litter. But what we have found is that the community have engaged with us really well. The rangers actively monitor and manage the parks with a number of various volunteer groups, and we've had active litter picking going on with volunteers and so forth to manage that. What we haven't seen over the last couple of months or so is it becoming a big issue. It's something we do monitor, we do track, and we do work with the local groups that support us in each of those country parks. But it's not the same issue that it was several months ago. We did manage to get on top of it.
Thank you, Jane. And I've got Mrs. Page next, and then Mr. Phillimore, and then Mr. Hunt. Mrs. Page.
Thank you very much. And I've just got a couple of very basic points. I very, very much like the layout of this report. I like the reflection, I like the challenges, and I like the looking forward. However, it just seems to be very much of a skeleton to me. And as we've just noticed, that skeleton needs some meat on the bones. So as Councillor Richardson said, can we have a briefing? And Councillor Morgan reflected also on some more information, and appreciating that traded services has brought in a great deal of money. And yes, Simon, we've never eaten so many school meals. I wonder whether we can slightly change the format and add to it that little bit extra as part of the future report, because this is an annual item and it makes scrutiny so much easier if we have got that little bit more information. I mean, yes, it has all been, has become very clear by the explanation, but it would be nice to have maybe in the challenges a risk item. How much risk is there to it? And for instance, it says the Luton contract brings in additional income of 1.2 million, but is that actual profit? Or, and So just a little bit more meat onto the skeleton, if we can in future. Is that possible, Chris, with being mindful that there are commercial aspects which we can't probably, but to just make scrutinizing this a little bit more simple?
Yeah, I mean, I can give that assurance that the next report will include a lot more detail, and if it doesn't, you can justifiably give me a really hard time next year.
Thank you, Chris. And so, Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. It's kind of just following a theme, but Chris, thank you, because I picked up straight away on the, and indeed Nev, the 8% margin at the end. And I guess it would need to be included in the written report that Mr. Richardson's requested, are the head office costs factored in? Because there is clearly an administration and officer time cost, and I'm just curious, and if it is included, great, and if it isn't, it should be, but it still needs to be included in the written report that Mr. Richardson's requested. So just an observation. Thank you.
Yeah, overheads are included in there. I mean, it doesn't include the capital charges that I mentioned to Mr. Richardson, but yeah, overheads are in there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I've just got Mr. Hunt, unless anyone else wanted to ask any questions. So, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I've found this a very useful discussion. The Commission clearly wants to know a little bit more about how this is running as a business. I can tell it. We need to be careful as councillors at this distance from it that we don't try and run the business ourselves. If we wanted to run it as a business, we must let it run as a business, albeit being clear about what we're asking it to deliver. And in that respect, I mean, Simon's already referred to the quality of children's meals, and so has Rosita. There's quality that counts, and the control we have from day to day. If you remember, we shifted the highways maintenance from an external contractor internally under Phil Crossland, because we had more control on that in difficult times. And I suspect had some of this business been out to the private sector during these very difficult times, we wouldn't be looking at the service that's been described today. And another aspect of this, besides the quality of food in children's schools, is that we're dealing with public assets. And in that respect, what I know very well is Bow Manor and the Beacon Country Park. And would we really want, and I'll say it, McDonald's to run the Beacon Cafe? I don't think we would. And there's a balance there about what we're asking officers to try and achieve. If we want to get more money out of that site, we probably could. But we've got to be clear about what we want officers to do and what we want the company to deliver. And finally, I think, for all that's been said, officers have done a lot of work to produce a report that we can all understand, which is important, and which shows that we've been a good employer, that people have been transferred to other duties rather than being made redundant from some of the parts of the business that aren't working well. And I think in the tradition of scrutiny reports, we ought to thank officers for delivering the report. And I think for what they've given, it is an excellent report. And we look forward to perhaps the high-level figures at a later date, which members have referred to. Thank you.
Chris. If I just make a couple of comments. I mean, I am a hard-nosed accountant, and these services do need to make money. They do need to make money, because if they didn't make money, we wouldn't provide them. But I must admit, I have mellowed a little bit over the last couple of years. I have been out and had some school meals and seen the gold standard and the quality, and they are very, 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 very good. So I do accept that it is there is a balance there. And with our school meals, if we were doing a race to the bottom, providing the cheapest school meals possible, I couldn't see the point in us doing it in some respects. So I accept there is a balance, but that there is a bottom line that they do need to kind of make money and more than wash their face. And that is it. That is a clear objective in terms of all those services, and that's why they're within the traded services remit. But I do accept there is a balance on a lot of them.
Thank you, Chris. I think Mr. Brecken wants to come in at this moment. Mr. Brecken?
Yeah, thank you. It was just really, I mean, I know all your questions have been asked, but I think it was, they've been really informative questions. I think if we knew how much time we'd have had on today's Scrutiny Commission agenda, I think the report could have been fuller, but yeah, it was a highlight. It was sort of looking at the sort of challenges that we have and the opportunities that we have as well. I think the corporate resources plan was 2018 to 2022, so it's certainly worth a refresh. It'll be due a refresh. I'm sure most authorities out there that have got business plans that are current will have to revisit them anyway, because I think what we've had to deal with in the last sort of 12, 15 months of the pandemic will have affected all of those. But I think the interesting point Simon made about the history of school meals, I think you need to write that down, Simon, because when Ernie White talked about the history of the county council, he decided that he needed to write it down, else that would be lost. And he wrote the excellent book that we all now know of. And if people haven't read it, they ought to read it. It's a very good read about why we're here today. But I think certainly if I thank Chris, Jane and Nev for the answers, I think we will take away all the comments that have been made. Leicestershire Traded Services do need to make a profit. That's what they're there for. And if they're not making a profit, they will be reviewed. But more than happy to bring back some more in-depth sort of figures in the report. And yeah, thank you for your time, Chairman and the Scrutiny Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Brecken, and thank you to all the members for questions and comments this morning, and to Chris, Jane and Nev for all the detailed answers that they've given. So our final item is the draft overview and scrutiny annual report 2020 to 2021. A copy of the draft annual report is attached to the agenda and starts at page 33. It's a backward-looking report and so outlines the key work undertaken over the last 12 months by the Commission and the 4 other standing overview and scrutiny committees. I think it's appropriate that I perhaps ask Mr. Galton, who was chairman of the Commission during this period, to introduce the report before opening it up for a comment. I would remind members, subject to our approval today, the annual report will be submitted to the full County Council for consideration at the meeting on the 7th of July 2021. So, Mr. Galton, did you want to make any comments to start?
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, Chairman, the report's been obviously put together by the officers in consultation with the scrutiny spokespersons. And I would like to thank the officers for the work that they did. Inevitably, it looks back over the work. And of course, it's been an extraordinary year because it's covered the pandemic. The Commission was the first meeting to meet under the kind of lockdown rules and remotely. And it really was touch and go whether the technology was going to work and enable everyone to get into the meeting and officers to participate. But it did. That was the point. It did. It was successful. And we managed to conduct the business. And in fact, looking back on that, you know, we looked at a number of issues and perhaps not in the depth that we could have done, but I think that we kept reasonable tabs on things. So yeah, I mean the report's there really as a record. I don't particularly want to draw out anything in particular. Actually, I think I do prefer coming to meetings and talking to people and seeing people. So going back to how we used to do things, yeah, I think meetings online have definitely got a place. But I think that it is easier to conduct business when you can actually talk to people in the room. So that would be my preference. On the comment that perhaps I should write a book, yeah, I'll give that some thought. I could think of a number of other titles like how to remove a council leader and things like that. But that's perhaps for another day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Galton. Mrs. Page, as Vice Chair now and at the time of the producing the report, did you want to add anything further before I open the rest?
Yes, I would actually. Thank you, Chairman, and ditto to everything Simon said, and I hope you write that book. But and whatever we're saying now, I'm sure you will hear again on the 7th of July. But and I think I must start with saying that I've been immensely proud of having been the vice chair and working with Simon. And I will reiterate that this scrutiny commission has done really, really well. We've been all inclusive, apolitical, and I think we delivered a great deal of work, especially through a very, very difficult time. I also think it has to be noted, and I'm proud of that too, it is how this council effectively embraced scrutiny, and that we have always been the critical friend. And I think it has added value to the decision-making process and to the working of the council at large. Yes, admittingly, COVID has changed the landscape, but the Commission and the 4 service-based committees have carried out that overview function extremely well through these difficult times. And if members care to look on page 36 of the report, it actually very much lays out what is overview and scrutiny. And I think we have managed to properly adhere to those rules. And the 4 panels, individually with their chairman, many thanks to them as well, have really embraced their functions and duties, not only throughout this year, but in previous years. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, otherwise nobody would read it, this report is just a very, very general snapshot. And all of the details, if anybody wishes to find them, they are on the website. But as a snapshot, it does give us a general overview what we have actually done and how many hours of work and how many meetings have gone into that. And again, I'm immensely proud. I'm very grateful to the previous chairman, the chairman of all of the committees, and all of the officers who supported the committee, not only over the last difficult year, but in previous years. And I think, considering all of the circumstances, we've done extremely well. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And first of all, as chair of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Panel Committee, this has probably been one of the most challenging years ever, and has, for our children and young people, because obviously we look at young people now up to 25. This came out of the blue. Nobody expected it. We still don't know fully what the effect has been and will be in the future for our children and young people. Their education has been disturbed. Their home life has been disturbed. Their routine has been disturbed. But I have to say that the committee, or the board sitting on children and families, we really feel we've worked our socks off. Not probably as much as the officers have, but systems were put in place and children were not forgotten. They were first and foremost at everything that we did and decided. The officers put into place immediately to make sure our children in care and our vulnerable children could have immediately and as quick an access to us as normal. Some of our young people find it was actually easier to talk online rather than have someone sitting in front of them in physically. You know, they're much freer. And of course, young people and children are far more au fait with virtual meetings and everything. We have challenges ahead. We have huge challenges, but working with our partners as well, Bernardo's and other people, I cannot praise the officers of this council highly enough. And also, I would like to thank the members of the committee that sat on children families last year. We have an exciting time ahead of us, in as much that, except for myself and one other councillor, it's a completely new committee of new councillors. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Fryer. Mrs. Page, you wanted to come back?
Yes, Chairman, through you, is it possible that the officers probably circulate an email link to all of the members? Because if we have got to jump somewhere online, we can't circulate it, or if we have to pull it up from ModGov, so that we can circulate it widely and probably even to our parishes, if that is possible, because I think the work of Scrutiny should be known as widely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. That's possible. Yeah, good. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from what Hilary said, I won't talk about adults' communities, but I think the theme of what Hilary says is perfect. I think when the COVID crisis is looked back on in the future, I think one of the areas that has excelled itself throughout this pandemic has been local government in totality, working across all tiers. I refer to the county, the districts, the parishes, and I think we should put on record our thanks to all of the staff involved in those organisations, all of the members involved, and just the sheer amount of work and dedication we've all shown to our local communities, irrespective of party. And I just think local government doesn't always get the praise it should do. And I think in this case, we deserve it and it should be recognised.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I think we would all agree with that point. Any other members wish to come in on this report? No? Okay. Well, thank you again to everybody for attending today's meeting and for all the contributions, and to all the officers for their responses as well. So item 12 is the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled to take place on the 12th of July 2021, and it's scheduled for the earlier time of 10 a.m. because of the heavy agenda and the number of items to be considered. This meeting is likely to be extended to a full day meeting, so an updated meeting invite will be sent to you in due course for the meeting. But thank you again to everybody for attending today and for everyone's contributions to the debate.